and welcome to our session. This is From Managing Projects to Owning Products. Our presenter is Albert Hughes. He's a product owner at H&S IT Web Applications team at Stanford. Let's take it away, Albert.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate it. I am Albert Hughes. This is me. My web journey started with AOL, America Online, back in the early 90s. And I taught myself HTML and how to build websites. And then I continue to work. I've had the opportunity to work with people and organizations in higher education, government, professional sports, tech, finance, developing and managing web-based projects and products. I'm currently a member of the H&S IT Web Services team in the role of product owner, where I oversee the development and roadmap for a web platform product that supports a portfolio of over 130 sites. Our team is 100% remote, and I live in Houston, Texas with my wife, Danae, and my son, Albert IV. I think I have a few of my team members in the session as well, so I appreciate them for attending. What type of projects are we talking about today? Web projects with a start and end date and a defined goal. That picture right here, if you see me, this was my younger days as a project manager. We used to have, if you can see those green folders in the back, we would do new website projects and we would have what was called a go live checklist. So we would get the requirements, do all the things on the list, launch the site, and that's me celebrating with a sparkling grape juice, because it is non-alcoholic. But the type of projects that we're talking about are new websites. It could be a website redesign, feature enhancement, migrations. I know with the crowd we have, and this being a project management track, some of you may be familiar with those type of projects. And then products, what type of products are we talking about? We're talking about websites and web platforms that require continuous development, updates, and care. This could be open source CMS platforms like Drupal or WordPress, or shared web platforms that you often see in higher education. You see these in government and even professional sports, where multiple sites, sometimes hundreds of sites, share one same code base and a shared set of features. And then we're talking about post-launch websites. So once you have a website project and that website launches, that project has now became a product that needs updates, needs care, and needs new development. So your current website, maybe you had a project launch a few years ago and it's getting outdated and you're just waiting for that new project to start. Well, you can treat your website as a product today and start making improvements right now. So from projects to products, if you all want to take a ride with me for a second, throughout my career as a technical project manager and now a product owner here at Stanford, I've had the opportunity to work with different organizations, and projects and products often cross. So as I said earlier, I taught myself HTML. I learned about the web, but when I came across the content management systems, Drupal and WordPress, is really when I got my career started. And both of those, what started as open source projects, could really be looked at as products, as something that they have a market, they have people that use that, they have a community. And so those are products, but from these products, as a technical project manager, I was managing projects where we were building websites using those products. After that, that time as a project manager led me to work at the University of Texas, and at UT Austin .edu at the time, we treated it like a product. They would have, at that time in Drupal 7, you would, for updates, for rollouts, you would have to have feature releases. We would do bi-weekly releases. So that started getting me even more familiar with working on looking at the website as a product itself. And even at that time, while I was at UT, this may be 2011, 2012, 2013, they start moving towards a shared model, or coming up with installation profiles or a UT specific Drupal product that different agencies could use. Let me go back. Okay, and then after UT, I had the opportunity to work for the Memphis Grizzlies. At the Memphis Grizzlies, the websites there, and while I was there, I managed plenty projects, and I also owned plenty of products. Where like Memphis Grizzlies, the Grizzlies.com, the website itself, we continuously updated it. So that's a product, but we were also using a shared Drupal platform for all of the NBA sites shared. So same features, same set, but customizable to our needs. And then even launching our website, launching a mobile app by the Memphis Grizzlies. Right after that mobile app launched, it became a product. And so, something I really picked up there is like when it comes to those type of products, that's when you start, the need for training, the need to actually get feedback from the users of that particular product so you can incorporate those changes. And then that led me to a previous role with a company called Lullabot, where I was working for an agency. And instead of building a project for a single website, I was working on a project to help migrate and create a new platform for indie commerce, which is a Drupal platform where a organization, American Booksellers Association, can provide independent bookstores across the country with their own website where they could sell any book title out there in the market. And so that process allowed me to work really closely with the product owner at Indie Commerce and start having me think more about end users and like the site editors and the community of people who they had to get requests from and kind of make sure that they're meeting the needs of a lot of people, but also creating something that's scalable. So I worked as a project manager. I worked alongside the product owner to help with roadmaps, help with milestone, and try to figure out where the product should be headed. And then Iowa.gov, same situation. These type of products where the state of Iowa has a platform where all of their individual agencies can join on. And a lot of times this is done for cost savings or a way to share features, because without that, each individual site was paying for its own hosting, its own developers, and this hundreds of sites. So if you can minimize that and kind of have one place where you can share those features, they saw a tremendous amount of savings. And then just like here at Stanford, I think some people may even be on the call and be familiar with web products. I know Stanford Sites, the platform we have in the H&S department. These are platforms that we can use. And even coming into Stanford and the team that I'm on with H&S IT, I know even we have a platform, but we've ran plenty of projects to get people onboarded to this project. So a lot of times we are looking at projects and then being able to roll them and roll into the mindset of it being a product. So that is from projects to products. And looking at this, the one other common thread that I've seen is all of these places that have that web-based product, there's also an underlying community. So like the Drupal community, WordPress, not just the contributors who contribute in the code, but the people who use the software, a combination of all of those people providing information back up to try to improve that product. At the Grizzlies, the NBA, they were looking at all the individual teams as the community, and then like the editors of those sites. And then as the Grizzlies being a product and our app being a product, our community was our fans. And so same thing where the community aspect of these web products is very, very crucial to get information as well as to incorporate and improve that product. So how's everybody feeling right now? Got thumbs up? Is this good information? Is anybody learning anything? Okay, cool. Sounds good. So this right here is kind of a look at project manager, first product owner. I've had both roles, and when I have my PM hat on, I think the focus there is get the task on the list completed on time and within budget. I have a list. I want to make sure that we're getting those things done. So I'm understanding my development team. I'm understanding their capabilities. I'm trying to get a gauge on the product owner or my stakeholder on what time, when does this need to get completed? Is there milestones I should be aware of? And then when I put my product owner hat on, my responsibility is to put the right task into the right order on the list in order to maximize time and budget. So looking at the differences in my PO hat, I'm really trying to make sure we're doing the right work. And how do I find out that this is the right work? I'm listening to the community. I'm listening to the users of the product or the platform or our website to understand what they want. I'm also looking for outside information. So in the case of the university, maybe there is, or with my current department and the H&S IT team, there may be something coming down from the university that we need to be aware of that may impact timeline or impact our schedule or our roadmap. So again, as the PM, I'm really focused on checking off items on the list and making sure we can get them through. And then the PO, I think there's a really important piece of understanding what tasks need to be done when within the right order so that you can really maximize the time and the budget and the resources that you may have to get those things completed. And then again, keep it going. Kind of the concept that I talked about earlier. When you launch your website, now we need to move into a product mode. A lot of times, especially I say back in the day because time is flying. But at one point, you spend a lot of money, you get your website up, it's shiny, everybody's excited, and then you stop editing it, you stop looking at it, and then you look up 2-3 years later and it looks the same as it did 2 years before. Now we have to spend a bunch of money to do something completely from scratch. Takes us another year to do that, and then we launch a new website and do it again. But what I'm saying is, once we launch the site, let's keep it going. This particular diagram that you see at the bottom is a concept that comes up in these type of web products, which is like they say DevOps, or the CI is continuous integration. The CD is continuous delivery or deployment. And so if you look at our pathway, if you start with plan is when we're putting our issues and tasks together. We're understanding what needs to get done. The code part, that's the developers developing based off what we said we need to do. That stuff is getting built, tested, whether that's manual or using automated testing processes, and then released and deployed out to hosting and to the public. People are using it. We're monitoring the performance, and then we're rolling it back into planning based off the information we had. The piece that I'm saying to add here on top is continuous care. So if we're looking at the bottom part being more focused on development of the platform, the continuous care is the interaction with that community that we talked about, understanding what they need, informing them of what's happening with the platform, and then taking that input and adding it into the loop and the cycle that we're going off of. And then we have one more, which is making sure we celebrate, because a lot of times, especially with products, with projects, we know they have a start and end date. So when that site launches, we could celebrate. Back at the company I worked at, we used to bong a gong or ring the bell or do something to celebrate the fact that we just launched a new site. And I think sometimes with products, there's not a natural, if we're moving in that continuous cycle, there's not always a natural place to celebrate. So I think it's really important that we take time and maybe find ways to celebrate. That could be, whether that's setting goals, that's certain milestones, that's, quarterly, that's something that we're doing to make sure as we're doing that continuous cycle of care or continuous cycle of updates for our website or our platform, we're still taking and finding the time to celebrate those wins and successes. And so that is, from managing projects to owning products. And when I'm saying owning, that's taking ownership. And I don't think that's just the product owner, but I think that's, whatever role you are on that team, when it comes to a product, there is space for ownership to have ownership within the success of that product. And again, I said I wouldn't hold y'all too long, and I wanted to have an opportunity to get some dialogue and to get some input, or have some people from this community share some insights that they may have on project management and products. So, any questions, thoughts, or insight that anybody would like to provide?
Question, I guess.
Yes, sir.
I have a product mindset for these things, and but I find a lot of times communicating with various stakeholders, product and project get interchanged, and even though I am sure you are aware of kind of distinct differences between them, I'm curious how you communicate that, how you handle, you know, somebody confusing what you do with project management.
Yeah, I think one thing is I agree that can be very, there's a thin line, but kind of goes back to the slide that I talked about, whereas I know that. So in communicating to these to folks, I think sometimes it is setting those expectations early and often of whose roles and responsibilities. I've seen people use RACI matrix or like diagrams to visually display, here are some responsibilities that this particular person is responsible for. Here are responsibilities I'm responsible for. Drawing the picture out really helps, because I think although we are making these buckets, and I had a diagram that shows specific product owner hat, project manager hat, I made it as a hat specifically because there could be times when you have to do one or the other and be in that role. But I think really trying to communicate and define responsibilities visually is something that comes to mind. I'd love if anybody else has another answer that could be beneficial, but that's what comes to mind for me. Really, just trying to define it and define our roles and responsibilities, and early. That way, we always have something to go back to. And like if you kind of define early of like, no, in my role, this is kind of what I need to be responsible for. If something comes up, then you can have something that you can use visually to kind of reconcile with, if that makes sense.
I was going to chime in that when we realized that we were forgetting to celebrate, we started celebrating batches. So when we got to 30 and when we got to 50 and when we got to 100. And so that was another way that we couldn't celebrate every 2 weeks. It was just didn't feel meaningful. But if you define those somewhat arbitrary milestones, then you can still celebrate.
Awesome. Questions, thoughts? See Andy.
Hi. That was great. I was curious, in the model you've kind of laid out here, if you see like what if any, what's kind of the role of a product owner within the start to finish project that you talk about? So maybe it's non-existent. Is it, another way to rephrase that, is the product owner there to kind of just pick up post go live, or is there a role for the product owner to play within, kind of the start to finish project that you talk about?
I think one place, if it's a project within the realm of the product, or a situation, kind of what I showed with the organization Indie Commerce, where we were in a project while they had another product going. So we were kind of revamping their product. So there's still the role of the product owner was to provide insight about the product, like to provide that same insight of like, here are the right things that you should be developing. Here's how it could impact the product itself. So there is still the piece of making sure, and especially I think there's a lot of times when that project might affect the product itself. Like this might be a sub project for an existing product. I think especially early on in creating the scope for that project, it would be important for the product owner to, inform the scope in relation to the product. So like definitely early in the process of like this is how this can impact the product. And then throughout that process, kind of making sure that, there's still that guardian, or that you're looking out for the product throughout the project to see how it may impact in the future or impact the roadmap. So I think a lot of time is informing early and then getting knowledge later so you can adjust the product roadmap according to how the project's going, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Thanks. That's part of the reason why I think probably a lot of us are here is because in our world, we hear the two and often it's just used so interchangeably. So I like the way you've laid it out here. I mean, in past work lives, I've been hired as a product owner and I found that 80% of what I'm doing is project management and vice versa. So it's almost like sometimes, depending on who you're working for, the line is not so clear, but I like the way you laid it out here. It's really good.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it's in over this process, because it's been like even putting this together, those same thoughts and trying to figure out what best information, but it's almost too we're looking at it from project and product, like, okay, what am I coming into? And then looking at not just my job title, but what role am I playing, and which role, which game am I playing? Am I playing the project game or the product game? And within these games, what's my actual role on the team now? And like you said, like how they even have now in basketball, if anybody's a basketball fan, things they have positionless basketball now, where we grew up with traditional point guards and centers, and now that's changing. Like, so you could, if people are, you all, it's also kind of, even as a product owner on the team I'm in, we may have someone who's a design lead, but essentially like they're the product owner for the design part of the product, right? Like and it's kind of like even in business, like if everybody's a CEO in their role, then everybody kind of has that ownership and has some buy-in into what we're doing. So I think it's similar to here. And I love that dialogue. And if anybody has some more examples of, like, I think those lines do get crossed. So like, what should I be doing? Uh, in like ways that we've handled that. I think even here, with one of my colleagues, yeah, sometimes we just had to say, let's write out 10 things that need to be done, and let's put our names and figure out who needs to do them. And then like have a guide, at least we know going forward, and try to work with it. I think products too, not in the sense of the manifesto of agile, but the agile mindset of let's try it, let's try something small, let's iterate, let's build upon it. I think it's important in the product world as well, of being able to experiment and like, let's try something small and continuous and going that continues to keep it going.
Yeah, Carson in the chat has added that extensive documentation and continuing contact with the community of users around your product has proven to be essential.
100%.
Yeah, and that at UC Davis, they do a bi-monthly co-working session where their advanced users and devs are there to work on specific sites. And then I think I agree with this comment that it seems like products are essentially project generators.
Yeah, I think they go both ways too, right? Because I think a project could be a product generator. A product can then generate projects from them as well. So I don't think that, and I do love the part about that community and being able to have those points of communication to communicate and receive communication. I mean, and receive feedback, right? So like you said, I think office hours, we do newsletters. There's the community of practices and stuff you can do in the Slack channels. I think someone said they kind of switched up the name of their office hours to co-working, to invite people to participate, because with the product, like this goes with web products and also in the business world, what I've heard about product, like it is, the users are going to know more than us. We can make assumptions, and truthfully, sometimes even a user can make an assumption, but then there's tools, trying to find those tools to collect data is very helpful too, from your community. Could be a survey, could be just Google Analytics to know what pages people are visiting. I know the concept of retrospectives, or being able to take the time out after a project or after a milestone to kind of regroup and get information for the people involved, as well as maybe you rolled out a new feature, taking the time to retrospect with the community. Maybe they requested a particular feature. Now you rolled it out. Are you taking the time to then come back? Hey, we rolled it out. Is this the feature that you all wanted? Can we check that off the list of something that you enjoyed and like it satisfied your need? So those are things there. Yep. Don't, if anybody has a thought or there's something that you thought, man, this would be kind of want to share this. This is the opportunity to share it. I'm giving you the open door to provide that insight. Again, I wanted to leave a little bit of room to get some questions out there, get some examples of some stuff that people have been doing when it comes to projects or products.
We do have another question in the chat from Joey. It is, can you share some examples of continuous care of service or development that's provided for Stanford units?
Cool. I know on our particular platform, and I don't know, I know you asked that question, Joy, didn't know if you asked that because you may want to answer it, but I know some stuff that we do on the H&S team, right? We recently start sending out maintenance reports. We have, again, we have user guides. We do the office hours. We are, of course, we have a support channel where users can, send support that I think for a product owner and for products, I think a lot of feature requests or a lot of improvements can come from support, where you can see, are people having challenges with certain things? So having those open lines of communication for people to, submit feedback, to ask for requests, and then, also again, communicating, I think is a part of care. So making sure people know, I think I saw where with Stanford sites, they post release notes in the Slack channel. I actually consider that as care too, because maybe somebody had requested a particular feature, maybe someone had asked about a question, and so when you post those notes, hey, is this the need, and kind of showing people that we're continuously updating this particular product. Yeah, again, I definitely appreciate everybody here. Again, I wanted to keep some time. Feel free to put your name and what department or your role in the chat. I'm saying it again because we have some more time. If you have a question, if you have a topic, if you have some insight to share, we're here talking about from managing projects to owning products. And again, that's projects being with start and end date, and then products that web platforms, websites that need that continuous care, continuous updates, and continuous development. In ways, we've talked about how they cross the lines between each other. We've talked about community for those product platforms and the people that use them and how we can support them. Yeah, just seeing if there's any more thoughts, any more insight. If there was anything that was said that somebody felt was helpful, feel free to share.
I think something that's come up in conversations recently, Albert, is the impact on budgets, or when we think about projects versus products. It's a lot easier to get a project funded than a product indefinitely funded. Right. So I think that's an interesting also take on the evolution of this kind of work.
Yeah, for sure. I think too, even in a session that we were in yesterday, there was the talk about are we moving away, or a strategy of moving away from the big project requests every several years to flipping the budget where it's more of a higher operational budget, a higher maintenance budget to maintain these products over time. So when you get to a time for a redesign or you get to the new platform, you don't have to start from scratch. I think maybe even looking at it like a home, if you wait for 5 years to now let's do some home remodeling, or you wait 10 years, that may end up costing a tremendous amount versus if every year you continues to do updates. So you don't get to the point where, okay, now I have to make these updates, or you put in a corner. I think that's one other place of having that continuous maintenance, having that continuous care, and increasing that part. It kind of it should give you some flexibility where it doesn't pop up like now all of a sudden this is so out of date, we have to switch it immediately and you kind of caught off guard. So there is the piece of increasing what we do in between the projects, versus just waiting until the next project. And I think it's interesting of knowing, how easy is it easier said than done when you have certain politics in place in certain industries and certain roles, and how do we go about that? I definitely think that's pretty interesting. But I would say, yeah, I do think there has to be a push of looking at our websites and our platforms and really looking at that product mindset and that continuous care mindset, as we continue to move and evolve. I think especially at the rate of technology and how it's moving, if you do wait and you don't pay attention, what it may be or what you have to evolve to, I think is also less predictable.
We've gotten a couple more questions in the chat. So the first one is, does your team do recharge for your projects?
I think Marion may have.
Yeah.
Oh, as a actual cost charge? Is that what the question
Is
is?
that the question?
I think there was a follow-up. I'm not sure if this was in relation to the question or just a comment of what you were saying at the time, but the maintenance budget is tough when a project is paid for by a grant. So Carson, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if I'm explaining your question well.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, they're kind of two separate things that kind of just came out of my head when he was talking there. So yeah, I guess my question is, do you split it up? So, for example, our platform, for example, is, maintained, from the just general campus budget, versus, and whenever we end up with a project that we have to do, then we have to, we end up recharging, the client, for the specific project. So we do a statement of work, we do, we charge for discovery, even, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering if you do the same kind of thing, and, what your thoughts were around that, and are there any difficulties, or do you like it, or is it too hard to do, or whatever? So I'm just kind of, thinking out loud around that kind of thing.
Is it okay if I answer this one, Albert? That has changed. So we used to do chargebacks. We didn't charge for discovery. We didn't charge for support, but we would charge for implementation portion of every web project. Albert and I work for a school. So the money would come from one part of the school and go to another part of the school, but it all rolls up to the same school. At the moment, we're choosing to not do chargebacks. And financially, it makes a lot of things easier. Where it gets tougher is, how do you have people have skin in the game, and reasonable size of requests when there is no almost downside to scope creep. So I think that's just the more of a softer practices. We have defined partnership agreements that we go over with our project stakeholders early on. That said, this is the scope we're agreeing to, this is the timeline you've set, this is how we're going to, if one thing changes between scope and time and everything else, what can change? We can't change all the things all the time. So it is a little bit tougher to manage, but right now we're not doing chargeback.
Interesting.
Yeah. We're also not implementing everything for everyone, right? If somebody comes and says, I really need this thing, and it's not a shared need, and it's not a core, need that fits the value of the team and the school, then we might help them find a better fit than what our team can provide.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, and then this next question is a term that it's from Robert. A term that we use in our organization is program manager for someone who manages a student, faculty, or public program, which could involve courses, events, applications, Marcom, etc. How would you relate that phrase of program manager to the term product owner?
Yeah, in this, let me make sure, in this particular context, I do see them a little bit different. I see them different as in, I feel like a product owner may work or interface with program managers, but I think product owner for me is specifically a little bit more focused on the actual development and the work that needs to get done to develop the product itself. I think in the product owner role, where I think there are some similarities where I need to understand the market and I need to I need to understand the users and the people that we're serving, our customers. But I think from the program side, it's probably really dealing more with the people who may be interfacing with certain software. That's my thought. If anybody else has some insight or that if we feel like that answered the question. But I think product owner to me is like a little bit more focused on understanding what needs to get developed to improve that web product.
I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of my own department, which is the Stanford Center for Professional Development. We also have program managers who fill a similar role to what Robert described. But I would say that they're not our product owners because our product is the content of the courses itself. And I'd say that in that case, it'd be our, I can't remember their title at the moment, but the people who are designing our course content would probably be our product owners versus our program managers who are making sure that everything is running smoothly. So they'd actually be more of our project managers than our product owner.
I think that's fair, for sure. What do we have? 3 minutes?
Yeah.
So is there any other, probably got one, we got time for one good closing question, I think. Does anybody have a good, or insight? If anybody has a good insight. Okay, Sarah, you raised your hand first, so you have it.
What's your favorite website or at Stanford or project that you've worked on?
That's amazing. The IT
I gave you a doozy.
The IT HumSci site. It's like if you go, I think it's IT-HumSci. That's probably my favorite because that's the team that I'm on, and I helped update the homepage as one of my first kind of. As product owner, I had the opportunity to also do some site building and play around with our platform, and that was one I was able to do some site building and work that I grew up, the part of Drupal that I really like and like the passionate part about it. So I think that was cool. So yeah, it-humsci.stanford.edu. Got to give shout out
That's
to
a
that.
good answer.
Cool. Well, I know we have 2 minutes. I appreciate everybody who joined. Again, if I'm on LinkedIn, I'm also in Stanford Who. If you see me around, I'm in Slack. Feel free to connect. Love to connect with anyone interested in the web, especially around Drupal or WordPress or content management systems. And yeah, hope everybody enjoyed Web Camp, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.